Hello everyone, today we're going to dive deep into how to access your creativity, not just occasionally, but reliably. Whether you're an artist, a student, an entrepreneur, or someone who simply wants to think more innovatively, creativity is not just a gift, it's a neural skill set that can be trained. Let's explore 5 clear signs that show you're accessing your creative potential, and how to enhance them using real neuroscience. Creativity is often thought of as something spontaneous, something that just happens. But the truth is, creativity is deeply tied to specific brain circuits that can be modulated, trained, and optimized. One of the most powerful triggers for creative thinking is exposure to novelty, new experiences, ideas, environments, or even emotions. Novelty isn't just refreshing, it's neurologically necessary for the brain to engage its creative machinery. When we encounter something new, our brain activates the dopaminergic system, particularly areas like the ventral tegmental area VTA and the nucleus accumbens. These regions are responsible for evaluating the salience of new stimuli, basically asking, is this important? Or should I pay attention to this? When the answer is yes, dopamine is released not as a reward but as a motivator, a chemical signal that propels us into exploration, learning, and risk-taking. All of these are fertile ground for creativity. Dopamine isn't about pleasure per se, it's about pursuit. When novelty causes this system to engage, our brain literally starts scanning for connections, alternatives, and possibilities. It becomes more plastic, more adaptable, and it's this state of neuroplasticity that forms the biological basis for creative insight. But it's important to understand that novelty doesn't have to be extreme. You don't need to travel to a foreign country or radically alter your lifestyle to benefit from this effect. Small shifts working from a different location, listening to a new genre of music, even changing the lighting in a room, can trigger novelty, induced dopamine release. These small changes are enough to disrupt routine pattern recognition in the brain and allow new associations to form. Creativity, after all, is about making connections that haven't been made before. The more rigid and repetitive our daily inputs are, the more the brain leans into predictable outputs. That's the default, but when the brain is introduced to something unfamiliar, it becomes temporarily disoriented, and in that disorientation lies the opportunity for new thought pathways to emerge. From a neurochemical standpoint, this novelty, induced dopamine release also increases the likelihood of neurogenesis in the hippocampus and long-term potentiation, LTP, both essential for memory and idea formation. This is why people often get their best ideas in new places, on walks in nature, in airports, or while traveling. These environments offer a break from routine and stimulate the exploratory systems of the brain. There's also an evolutionary explanation behind this. In ancestral environments, novelty often meant either opportunity or threat. A new berry might be poisonous, or it might be a superfood. A new animal might be dangerous, or it might be the next meal. As a result, the brain evolved to pay special attention to the unfamiliar, and that same mechanism underpins much of what we label as creative curiosity today. Another dimension of novelty and creativity involves the prefrontal cortex, particularly the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex (DLPFC), which is responsible for executive function and abstract thinking. Novel stimuli activate this region more intensely than familiar ones. This activation leads to greater engagement in conceptual flexibility, the ability to switch perspectives and approach problems from new angles. That's a fundamental skill in any creative discipline, whether it's writing, music, business strategy, or scientific innovation. We also see this relationship between novelty and creativity in experimental studies. One study using functional MRI showed that individuals exposed to new and complex images before performing a creative task demonstrated significantly higher activity in regions associated with creative ideation compared to those who viewed familiar images. Even the act of imagining novel scenarios, what psychologists call mental simulation, can enhance creative performance. Importantly, this means novelty can be self-generated. You can ask yourself questions like, What's a perspective I haven't considered yet? Or how would a child look at this? Or even what if I reverse the rules? These prompts mimic the effects of encountering something externally novel by shaking up internal cognitive patterns. So, in practical terms, if you want to boost your creativity, one of the most effective things you can do is introduce small elements of unpredictability into your daily routine. Take a new route to work. Try journaling at night instead of in the morning. Listen to music in a language you don't understand. Even the smallest shifts can activate novelty-related circuits in the brain and prime it for original thinking. Creativity isn't elusive, it's biological, and novelty is the on switch. One of the most misunderstood aspects of human cognition is mind wandering. From early education to corporate environments, we're trained to believe that focus is everything, that a wandering mind is a distracted, inefficient, or even lazy one. But neuroscience tells a very different story. When your mind drifts, you're not shutting down, you're activating one of the most complex and creatively powerful networks in your brain, the default mode network, DMN. The DMN is not active when you're hyper, focused on a task like solving a math problem or sending an email. Instead, it lights up when you're doing activities that require little conscious effort, walking, showering, driving a familiar route, or simply sitting in silence. It's during these states that the brain begins to pull from multiple areas: memory, emotion, spatial awareness, and imagination. Why is this important for creativity? Because creativity is not just invention. It's the integration of past experience, current emotion, and future projection. The DMN is uniquely positioned to do this because it connects areas like the medial prefrontal cortex, posterior cingulate cortex, and angular gyrus. These regions allow us to construct narratives, simulate hypothetical events, and form abstract connections that don't always emerge when we're in task mode. In fact, many of the aha moments people experience, those seemingly random insights that appear out of nowhere, often occur during mind-wandering states. The brain, untethered from rigid external input, begins to freely associate, retrieving and combining ideas across time and context. In these moments, the creative process isn't forced, it emerges. One of the mechanisms supporting this is something called spontaneous cognition. While focused attention is valuable for problem solving, it often keeps our thoughts narrow and linear. Spontaneous cognition, which increases during rest and daydreaming, allows for nonlinear thought patterns, the very kind that support innovation. You've likely experienced this yourself, a creative idea or personal insight that arrived not while working, but while zoning out, walking the dog, or brushing your teeth. Another key element here is the brain's ability to toggle between networks. For high-level creativity, there's often a dynamic interplay between the default mode network and the executive control network ECN, the one responsible for attention, decision making, and goal setting. When you're able to shift between these modes, drifting into mind wandering, then zooming in with intention, you create a cycle of idea generation and refinement. The DMN generates and the ECN evaluates. This balance is critical. However, modern life rarely gives us the opportunity to tap into this process. Most people fill every moment of silence with stimulation, notifications, podcasts, scrolling, or messaging. What we lose in that constant stream of input is time for mental spaciousness, which is where the DMN thrives. When the mind has nothing specific to do, it becomes capable of everything. There's also a neurochemical foundation for this. During periods of rest or low cognitive demand, levels of acetylcholine, a neurotransmitter involved in sharp attention, drop, while serotonin and endorphins often rise. This neurochemical shift supports relaxed, creative ideation and makes the brain more permissive to unusual or playful thoughts. So, what can we do to take advantage of this? First, we need to reframe our relationship to boredom and mental stillness. Boredom is not a sign of cognitive failure. It's often the entry point to creative thinking. Give yourself time without stimulation. Go for a walk without your phone. Sit quietly in a room without reaching for entertainment. These aren't wastes of time, they are some of the most valuable mental spaces you can create. Second, introduce unstructured thinking periods into your day. These can be as short as 10-15 minutes. The key is to allow your mind to roam without trying to solve a specific problem. This signals the DMN to activate and opens the door for creative associations to arise naturally. Finally, start tracking your wandering thoughts. Many artists, scientists, and entrepreneurs keep notebooks or voice memos specifically for capturing random ideas. The insights that emerge in these drift states often feel fleeting, but they can become game changers when captured and cultivated later. We must recognize that the brain is not always most productive when it is sharply focused. Sometimes its greatest work happens when we step back, allow drift, and let the mind do what it was evolutionarily designed to do, explore itself. Mind wandering is not a distraction from productivity. It is one of the highest forms of mental productivity. Creativity, at its deepest level, is not just about generating ideas. It's about getting into a state where ideas naturally emerge and link together. One of the most powerful and reliable ways to tap into this mental and neurological space is through the flow state, a state of consciousness where time feels altered, action and awareness merge, and deep focus comes effortlessly. Neuroscience defines the flow state as a transient period of heightened brain efficiency, where multiple systems align to optimize cognitive output. This includes decreased activity in the prefrontal cortex, increased coordination between brain hemispheres, and elevated release of key neurochemicals like dopamine, norepinephrine, anandamide, and serotonin. These chemicals not only elevate mood and motivation, but also increase pattern recognition, lateral thinking, and focus, all essential ingredients for creativity. Let's start with the prefrontal cortex. This area of the brain is responsible for executive functions, decision making, self-monitoring, impulse control, and critical evaluation. It helps you think about the past and future, analyze your behavior, and apply learned rules. However, during flow, this region temporarily deactivates in a process known as transient hypofrontality. That might sound counterproductive, but it's actually crucial. By silencing the part of the brain responsible for overanalysis and self-criticism, the mind gains freedom from constraint. You stop second-guessing, you stop trying to control every detail, and in that release, you enter a state where spontaneity, intuition, and nonlinear connections flourish. The usual boundaries that box in your thoughts fade, allowing creative solutions to emerge naturally, sometimes explosively. Another key component of flow is time distortion. In a flow state, minutes can feel like hours or hours like minutes. This is not an illusion. It results from decreased activity in the parietal lobe, which regulates spatial and temporal awareness. In flow, your brain's usual sense of time becomes irrelevant because the task itself absorbs your full attention. You're not thinking about what happened earlier or what might happen later. You are deeply present, and that's where peak creativity thrives. Flow also involves the brain's reward circuitry, especially the dopaminergic system. Dopamine, often misunderstood as just a pleasure chemical, is primarily involved in motivation and reward prediction. It sharpens focus, increases energy, and reinforces behavior by creating a feeling of satisfaction. In flow, dopamine floods the brain, reinforcing the state and making it more likely you'll return to it in the future. This is why flow feels not only effortless, but also deeply fulfilling and often addictive in the best way. From a creativity standpoint, this neurochemical cocktail, which also includes norepinephrine, which heightens attention and speed of thought, anandamide, which promotes lateral thinking and dissolves rigid associations, and serotonin, which improves mood and social connectivity, forms the optimal internal environment for creative thinking. These chemicals increase the number of novel connections your brain can form and the likelihood that those connections are meaningful. So, how do we access flow more reliably? First, recognize the entry conditions. Flow doesn't arise randomly. It tends to emerge when three factors are present: clear goals, immediate feedback, and a balance between challenge and skill. If a task is too easy, you get bored. Too hard, you get anxious. But when it's just hard enough to demand your full attention without overwhelming you, you enter the sweet spot. That's where flow is most accessible. Second, minimize distractions. Flow requires uninterrupted focus. Put your phone in another room, use noise, canceling headphones or ambient music, block off dedicated time. The brain needs about 15-20 minutes of sustained concentration to drop into flow. Every interruption resets the clock. Third, develop pre-flow rituals. Many high performers, from artists to athletes, use routines to signal their brain that it's time to enter flow. This could be as simple as a specific playlist, a breathing pattern, or even a certain drink or lighting setup. Over time, these cues create associative triggers that help your nervous system transition into the creative zone more efficiently. Finally, respect the after effects of flow. It's energetically expensive. Your brain releases large amounts of neurochemicals during flow, and it takes time to replenish them. After a deep creative session, allow for recovery, walking, sleep, nutrition, and silence, so you can return to that state when needed. Creativity isn't just about ideas. It's about accessing a state in which ideas naturally arise, connect, and evolve. Flow is that state, and with the right tools and conditions, it's trainable. One of the defining features of creativity is the ability to see connections where others see separation. It's what allows a musician to blend styles, an entrepreneur to combine industries, or a scientist to discover unexpected links between theories. This ability, known as pattern synthesis, is not just a cognitive skill. It's a neural phenomenon involving the communication and coordination of multiple brain networks. At the core of pattern synthesis is the brain's capacity to integrate information across different domains: sensory, emotional, conceptual, and experiential. This ability is made possible by dynamic interactions between three key systems: the default mode network DMN, the salience network SN, and the central executive network SEN. The default mode network is most active during introspection, imagination, and mind wandering. It's the system that retrieves memories, constructs scenarios, and engages in mental time travel, imagining the future based on the past. The central executive network, by contrast, is responsible for focused, goal-directed thinking. It allows us to hold attention on specific tasks, solve problems, and inhibit distractions. The salience network serves as the switchboard between the two, deciding what matters, what's novel, and when to shift between free, flowing thought and focused effort. When these three networks are in balance, communicating, alternating, and collaborating, the brain becomes highly capable of integrating disparate ideas into something original. This is the essence of creative pattern synthesis, pulling a concept from one context and applying it in another, or fusing two seemingly unrelated insights into a novel framework. One of the fascinating features of this process is that it's often nonlinear. Ideas can arrive suddenly and out of order. The brain might surface a metaphor before you understand the concept behind it. You might visualize a solution before articulating the problem. This is not a flaw. It's a sign that the brain is accessing subconscious associations and allowing novel pathways to surface before your conscious mind has fully caught up. Pattern synthesis also relies on a rich mental inventory, what psychologists call semantic distance. The more varied and expansive your knowledge, experiences, and inputs, the greater the potential for interesting connections. This is why many creative thinkers across disciplines often seem unusually curious. They read widely, explore topics outside their field, and allow themselves to become immersed in unfamiliar environments. These experiences provide the raw material for creative combinations. From a neural standpoint, pattern synthesis is enhanced by cross-hemispheric communication, especially between the left and right prefrontal cortices. The left hemisphere tends to focus on linear logic and language, while the right is more holistic and visual. When both are activated in harmony, the brain can analyze and imagine simultaneously. This is a powerful foundation for innovation. There's also a neurochemical layer to this. During creative insight, levels of dopamine rise, especially in the striatum and prefrontal cortex. Dopamine doesn't just boost motivation, it enhances cognitive flexibility. It makes the brain more willing to explore new paths and less likely to fall back into familiar patterns. This is why people often have more creative breakthroughs when they are in elevated emotional or energized states. Dopamine is more active, and so is their capacity for novel association. Interestingly, the ability to connect distant ideas isn't always conscious. Studies using EEG and fMRI have shown that many creative connections occur milliseconds before we become aware of them, in a phase of subconscious incubation. That's why sleep, walking, and moments of rest often yield insights. The brain continues connecting patterns in the background, even when you're not actively trying to solve a problem. This is also why judgment-free ideation is so important. If you evaluate ideas too early, you may shut down those strange, fragile links before they have time to solidify. Pattern synthesis needs freedom to explore without fear of error. Many of the greatest innovations in history began as thoughts that seemed odd or illogical at first, and only later revealed their brilliance. To improve your capacity for pattern synthesis, consider expanding your input variety, read outside your comfort zone. Talk to people in unrelated industries, engage in hobbies that stimulate different parts of your brain: music, movement, sketching, storytelling. The more diverse your inputs, the richer the potential for creative cross-pollination. Creativity isn't just about originality. It's about recombination, seeing the familiar through an unfamiliar lens, and realizing that two ideas from distant corners of your mind might just belong together. When your brain starts making those connections, it's not random. It's a deeply intelligent, highly evolved process that you can nourish and repeat. One of the most overlooked components of creativity is its emotional signature. We often imagine creativity as a purely cognitive or intellectual act, something that comes from thought, analysis, or imagination. But in reality, some of the most powerful and lasting creative insights are deeply emotional. They come with a rush of energy, a spark of intuition, or even a sense of awe that signals something important has occurred. That rush isn't metaphorical. It's a neurobiological event, a result of specific chemicals and brain regions being activated during the creative process. When you feel a surge of energy in response to a new idea, that's the limbic system coming online, particularly structures like the amygdala, insula, and anterior cingulate cortex. These areas help evaluate emotional salience. In other words, they decide whether an idea feels personally meaningful or significant. This emotional activation plays a critical role in creativity because it acts as a kind of internal highlighter. It tells your brain, "Pay attention, this matters." In fact, studies show that people are more likely to remember and develop creative ideas that are emotionally charged, even if they don't fully understand why in the moment. The emotional tag makes the idea stand out in memory and motivates further exploration. This surge is often accompanied by dopamine release, especially in areas like the ventral striatum and nucleus accumbens, which are part of the brain's reward system. Dopamine enhances focus, pattern recognition, and motivation, all of which are essential for taking an initial idea and shaping it into something meaningful. But dopamine alone doesn't explain the full picture. When a creative idea touches on something personally resonant, oxytocin may also be released. Oxytocin is often associated with bonding and trust, but it also contributes to the sense that an idea feels right, or aligned with your values or identity. This emotional clarity, the feeling that something deeply fits, is often what pushes an idea from being interesting to being essential. Another key player is the insula, which integrates internal body signals like heartbeat and breath with emotional context. It helps us become aware of subtle changes in our internal state, that sense of something shifting when a new insight arises. Many people report feeling goosebumps, a jolt of excitement, or even tears when a powerful creative moment occurs. That's interoception, your brain reading signals from the body and using them to mark the moment as meaningful. Follow them. Creativity is often seen as an innate talent, something you either have or don't. This belief is not only incorrect, it's limiting. From a neurological standpoint, creativity is not a fixed trait, but a trainable set of brain functions that can be improved with intention, repetition, and the right strategies. Just like physical strength, endurance, or memory, creativity responds to training, and the mechanisms that support it are well defined in the brain. The human brain is inherently plastic, meaning it's capable of changing structure and function in response to experience. This adaptability, known as neuroplasticity, is the foundation of learning, and creativity is a form of learning. It involves taking in information, organizing it, making new connections, and generating original output. Every time you challenge yourself to think differently, explore unfamiliar territory, or solve a problem in a new way, you're exercising and refining creative circuitry. One of the primary brain regions involved in creative thought is the prefrontal cortex, particularly the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex and orbitofrontal cortex. These areas help with abstract reasoning, mental flexibility, and the integration of diverse information sources. With regular mental stimulation and exposure to complex challenges, the connectivity and efficiency of these areas can be enhanced. Additionally, creativity draws heavily on the default mode network (DMN), responsible for imagination and internal reflection, and the salience network, which helps identify what information is relevant or novel. The more often these networks are engaged together, the more seamless their communication becomes. This integration is a skill, and like any skill, it improves with practice. What this means practically is that creativity can be intentionally cultivated through deliberate habits, exercises, and environments. One of the most effective methods is daily ideation, the practice of generating new ideas without judgment. This could involve journaling, free writing, drawing, or even creating business concepts. The key is not quality at first, but quantity. Neuroscience has shown that increasing the number of ideas increases the likelihood of generating original, useful ones. Over time, the brain becomes more efficient at divergent thinking, the ability to produce multiple solutions from one idea. Another important tool is novelty exposure. As discussed earlier, new environments, experiences, and stimuli activate the brain's dopaminergic system and increase plasticity. Regularly placing yourself in new situations, even small ones like changing your workspace or listening to unfamiliar music, forces the brain to adapt, and in doing so, opens new creative pathways. Equally important is movement. Physical activity, especially rhythmic movement like walking or cycling, boosts blood flow to the brain and activates regions linked to both focus and creativity. Many of history's most creative individuals, from philosophers to inventors, used walks not as breaks, but as creative training sessions. Modern neuroimaging supports this, showing increased connectivity between brain regions after light aerobic activity. There's also a powerful role for deliberate rest. Rest doesn't mean doing nothing, it means giving the brain time to process, incubate, and integrate ideas. Sleep, especially REM sleep, has been shown to support problem solving and insight formation. Even short periods of daydreaming, if protected from distraction, allow the default mode network to connect thoughts in ways that conscious effort cannot. Structured downtime is a part of the creative process, not an interruption of it. Mindfulness practices are another way to train creativity. Mindfulness, especially open monitoring meditation, increases cognitive flexibility, the ability to shift perspectives and notice subtle details. It teaches the brain to become aware of thought patterns without being consumed by them. This is essential for creative thinking, which often involves breaking habitual responses and seeing familiar problems through a new lens. The final component is emotional resilience. Creative thinking often involves risk, the risk of failure, judgment, or wasted effort. Building tolerance for uncertainty through practices like breathwork, cold exposure, or psychological reframing, conditions the nervous system to stay engaged even when outcomes aren't guaranteed. A more resilient nervous system supports a more exploratory, less inhibited mind. The bottom line is this: creativity isn't reserved for a select few. It's not a mystery or a gift passed down genetically. It's a neurocognitive function shaped by biology, influenced by environment, and responsive to training. Whether you're a writer, engineer, entrepreneur, or student, you can strengthen your creative capacity through consistent, intentional practices that align with how the brain actually works. You don't need to wait for inspiration to strike. You can build the neural foundation that allows creativity to arise not occasionally, but reliably.